So, Julian, here is a story that I want to tell you. I think that in Munich, about 4 days ago, it feels like a century already, but a couple of days ago, um, Europe and transatlanticism came to an end, and now we are in a new era. I was looking for milk in my fridge, which I usually have copious amounts, and I couldn't find it. So I think I take this as complete confirmation that the world has radically changed.
Well, I mean, a lot of things changed for sure, but I mean, I'm lucky that I haven't run out of milk yet this week and the apocalypse hasn't kicked off. But yeah, no, we've had a. It's. I mean, when you think about the fact that we're only just getting to the end of February after 2 months that seem to have dragged on forever.
Well, just to remind you, I mean, Trump has been in the White House for tomorrow will be 1 month.
I mean, to be honest, we can only save ourselves at this stage. I mean, look, it's been a month of Trump. Well, I mean, let's face it, it's been like almost a decade now of Trumpism and all this nonsense. I mean, at this stage, it's basically, I mean, I'm pretty sure people listening to this are going to have seen my shenanigans online. We've been saying this for 10 years now. It's been about a decade. I mean, you can even go back 100 years if you want, not 100 years, but, a good 70, 80 years if you want to go back to what de Gaulle was saying, is that we need to just be able to stand alone. And the issue is that we got too comfortable in the post-World War II order, where people are just happy to just sit there, uh, list platitudes, put out some good ideas, let them die quietly on the table, forget that we have increasing instability across the world, that we have increasingly poor relations with our biggest security guarantor, surprise, surprise, the US, and that when you get a guy who comes from the far right, is an isolationist, is anti-globalism, anti-liberal ideas, anti-cooperation, anti-collaboration, and who believes in this whole concept of Europe concept and seems to think that he's a modern-day Metternich. I mean, can we be surprised? I mean, we've
No,
been saying
I
this for
think
for
I
years now.
think I think you're right. I don't think we can. Well, I think people can be surprised. Germans can be surprised because that's essentially the modus operandi of the Germans to basically just sleep deep slumbers and then suddenly be surprised. But for the rest of us, I think that it is pretty much what you're describing. We've been talking about this and we've been repeating this um, for a very long time, certainly for a decade at least. 2016 is really when he first took power, and these things, the complete madness of what had been a really grotesque presidential campaign, materialized into a White House system. It is kind of incredible to think that at the end of his mandate, which ended with a riot and an attempted coup in the US, uh, should have been enough to tell everybody looking something very, very bad is going on, and something very, very bad has not come to an end, and it's still going to be operational for the next couple of years. The response in Europe was, what word am I looking for? Completely retarded. The reaction in Europe was, well, America is back. That was not America. Whereas my position is that, in fact, Trump, Vance, and the rest of them are really the sort of very expression of the American tourist that we have all come to know and loathe around Europe, just kind of ambling loudly into places. The thing that I do believe that is completely new, really completely new, and I mean, you can either correct me or you can just rebut me, uh, is that we saw in Munich, or München, as they call it here, Vance take the podium and declare war on Europe. I actually see this moment as the declaration of war, ideologically, but also to a large degree economic, diplomatic, and importantly, geostrategic. Because I think that to a large degree, what was said in those 20 minutes of feverish madness was that the security architecture of Europe is no more.
I mean, it's very much what you've said. I mean, look, let's be honest. We've shown a high level of ignorance in general about what's actually happening around us. So, I mean, look, I don't think it's much of a secret that I've been a big member of the strategic autonomy bandwagon, that I'm a Macronist, that I've always been pushing for the fact that we need a European army, and, being a federalist helps you get in that direction. But I do think that there was a high level of ignorance from a lot of people who didn't quite understand what was coming and didn't really get what we were trying to do in France. As we were one of the big proponents of the strategic autonomy movement and this kind of thing. And one reason for this, I think in part, is that people are still traumatized by history of French gallivanting around the continent and just doing things that tend to impact everybody else. So there's a latent distrust. And on top of that as well, there is a compounding comms issue where we were maybe not giving the information out or sharing our ideology or sharing our ideas as clearly as we should. Now, has Germany been screwing up a lot? Yes. Because there is a misunderstanding of what actually is happening, and that trade and economic power isn't the be all end all. So it helps if you use it to back up other geostrategic tools, as you said. So, for example, if you use the money you're making to create a powerful army, if you're using the money to create powerful market actors or research institutes that are able to put you on the front edge, and if you're putting that money towards increasing your resilience to forms of espionage and sabotage, such as the wave of disinformation and misinformation that is now currently drowning the German elections. And, good luck to you guys for this weekend, but ooft. And the problem is that that's not really been happening. And you can point at several things that are causing this to happen. So, even though regulation is a good thing, did we go too far in a lot of things and sort of hamstring our industrial actors and our experts and our brains? Yeah, we did. Have we been investing enough into military forces, military equipment, and producing, European equipment and tanks and airplanes and fighter jets and everything that we should have been doing, because this is how you ensure that not only are you in control of all of your equipment, but the money you're spending on this stays on the continent and is being used to fund European jobs. We didn't really do that. And again, going back to the point on poor communications, or a history of traumatic French behavior, I guess you could say. The problem we had is that everybody started thinking of this strategic autonomy movement in zero-sum terms. People were scared of having European equipment and manufacturers and supply chains and what have you, because as it was the French, or this was the response I got frequently at least, because it was the French proposing it, people turned it into the French just want to sell Rafales and French submarines and French assault rifles, ignoring the fact that you have producers from across the continent in Germany and Italy, I think even in Spain and Poland and Romania. I mean, all of this to say that we've basically let ourselves become weak. We basically cut our own knees out underneath us just because of internal stupidity and nonsense. And, this is some reason why I'm really happy that Draghi stood up and basically told everybody off in the middle of the European Parliament. Because
I mean, I think you're right. I think that it's really refreshing to see Draghi show the European Parliament, but probably the European Union by and large, for the obstructionist operation that it actually is. I mean, and the thing that is very curious about the European institutions is that they obstruct themselves There is a strange commitment to proceduralism. They're not fighting anybody else. They're just doing, in the end, the bidding of Trump and the mullahs of Urbanistan and of Putin by just like shooting themselves in the feet. But at the same time, I think it is also true that there is kind of an endemic lack of self-confidence. I mean, it's really not just a matter, I think, of, it's not really just a matter of divisions. It's not just a matter of proceduralism. It's not just a matter of the fracture of European political will. I think that there is always a sense, and I keep hearing this in the corridors of power, well, we cannot do it. Europe cannot do it. They cannot rebuild, we cannot just build a social media operation, which is complete nonsense. I mean, the Chinese did it with Weibo, the Russians did it, the Americans did it in 5 or 6 different occasions. Gap did it, Trump did it himself, there was Parley, the Brazilians did it, for crying out loud. The same thing goes for sort of the unification of a digital commercial space. I mean, the Russians went out and put Yandex, essentially reverse engineering American operations. The same goes for, payment systems and fintech in Europe. So in a way, the thing that is really interesting about the Draghi speech is that it doesn't really just concern the European Parliament. It goes much farther. It goes, as you're pointing out, into defense, it goes into a common market, it goes into digital developments, it goes into critical infrastructure, it goes into all sorts of security liabilities. And the thing that continues to get me, especially since the Vance Munich appearance, since the Vance show at Munich, in the Munich cabaret, is that when you actually listen to the European political machine responding, it's as if nothing had been said. I mean, you posted today, I saw it, today being Wednesday, the 19th, you posted Scholz's response, which is that, NATO must stand together and we must work together. But this is completely, I mean, it is another feature of the German brain to confuse expectations with facts, right? It's like, look, this is gone. We're not standing together. They're not standing with us. They will not defend our borders. They will actually they will sell Ukraine like they sold Czechoslovakia. And it's even worse than that, because if we don't actually take care of this soon enough and figure out a strategic plan, we're going to have actually vodka with Putin in Paris within 2 weeks.
Ooh, I disagree. Okay, hold on. I'll get to that point in a second.
Okay.
That's.
You think that was too far?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think
more so.
if Putin made the mistake of invading Europe, I think that would end very badly for him. And
okay, but
I'll
wait,
get to that in a second.
It would end up very badly for almost everybody.
Oh yeah, well,
with a few important exceptions, right?
If we end up getting invaded by Russia, we're fucked. We're taking a 30-year breather, and just about everything is going to be a lot worse for a while, and that's pretty much it. But no, I mean, coming back to what you were saying earlier about the reaction to the Draghi report and the lack of confidence at the European level, I think there's another point that is actually quite problematic, at least from a geopolitical point of view, is that we keep trying to play fair. We have everybody and their mother trying to screw us over in some way, shape, or form. And the international rules-based order is basically collapsing around us. And yet we're trying to play fair in a world where everybody is cheating and stealing and doing every underhanded trick they can to get through and make something turn to their advantage without fail. And the problem when you take that position is that you're basically, I mean, it's like that Indiana Jones scene where the guy comes out with a sword, I think, and Indy just pulls out a handgun and shoots him. You're fighting a battle under rules that no one else cares for. And the problem that we have is that this, combined with a lack of confidence, leads to us making stupid comments like, we can't create a European social media. We can't create a certain system that will help us do certain things. We saw this with the next generation Eurofighter, where there's a lot of problems because of the fact that certain producers don't feel they can do it. You had the same issue with the German carriers, I think, where they said, oh, we can't create the software required to make this happen. We have to buy from America or Israel. When we have some of the best minds, European minds, I'll add, working across the world in software development and what have you. And it's this endemic weakness that I think is starting to get on everybody's nerves, actually, because more and more you're seeing European citizens who want a stronger EU. They want stronger action, but they don't. They're getting pissed off about the fact that people just aren't really doing anything. We're not really, as a union, pushing forward in the way we should. I mean, we had all the merger cancellations by the Vestager cabinets for the last mandate, despite the fact that everybody was saying we need bigger European companies. Even though I understand the concerns about social and ecological issues and some competition topics, we just need them. That's it. We keep hearing this nonsense about. I mean, there's the thing about the Draghi report releasing, and you had Lindner come out less than 2 or 3 hours after saying, "Oh, we're not paying for that." Like, we have a class of individuals in Europe who seem to have managed to make it into the corridors of power, who are completely ignorant of reality, don't know anything aside from their own egos and their own interests, and who seem hell-bent on making sure we can't actually do anything.
Well, Lindner is actually a very interesting case from a German point of view, but certainly from a European point of view, because you have somebody that has no economic competence to talk about, simply a political ambition. Well, this is actually, I think that this is something that I'm not saying merely as a way to, as an expression of theorism. This is really somebody that has no business building macroeconomic policy.
Yeah.
He managed to push himself into the government position because he was just a kingmaker. They needed this guy in order to be able to form coalition. He already had screwed Merkel, and by that he had pretty much screwed the entire German political landscape, because he forced the SPD back into government with Merkel by abandoning his possible coalition with Merkel and the Greens.
Yeah.
And what that would have done, incidentally, is to leave as the majority of the opposition in the German parliament the far right, the AfD. And then, once he was in power, he has been consistent in the complete devastation of any serious pro-European policy.
Yeah.
And he has done it from a position of essentially informal power. Because in a way, he has no business calling the shots for European policy, but there you have him. So I think that the problem is not just Lindner. The problem is that to a very large degree, Europe is awash with Lindners.
Yeah.
Europe is awash with.
It's true. I personally think Lindner's one of those sort of Twitter libertarian types who doesn't really understand what's going on and just kind of opportunistically comments on whatever's happening and hopes that it's going to work out somehow. And like you say, we've got people like this across the continent. I mean, I'm no stranger to party politics, and you see some of the most horrendous things happening in the European parties, in the European groups, in the national parties. And it's one of these things that is... I mean, look, I don't want to be that guy who says, oh, European democracy is broken and blah, blah, blah. But in some senses, it kind of is, because you're not getting the right people to the right places. You're getting
I thought that was the very essence of democracy.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, it's one of these things that it's... I mean, there's a social aspect to the whole political engagement thing that people often forget, is that not everybody actually has the opportunity to actually genuinely make their voices heard. You know, either financially, either socially, either through education or whatever. I mean, I remember you have these situations where, for example, you go to university. The people getting these educations in political affairs, in economics, or not in economics in Linton's case, in these core important forms of societal engagement, integration, and expression aren't the average Joe. I mean, I think you and me are actually probably outliers in like the the lower middle working class types who actually made it this far into the our fields, right? The people who are most affected by a lot of the policies just aren't engaged in the politics because they don't know how, they don't know what to engage in, they don't feel they can, and a bit like the EU trying to figure out its head from its tail, they don't have the confidence to actually do it. I mean, God knows in Croydon, I didn't really meet many people who thought that people were going to listen to them when it came to a lot of what was happening in politics. And a lot of these people had really good ideas about how to support people in who are suffering from drug addiction or people who are suffering from a lack of food to eat due to financial issues, or how to deal with things like zero-hour contracts in the UK, or how to deal with the differences between regions in a single country, let alone the continent. And we're not getting the right people through to the positions that they need to be in to actually make sure that we don't have these lintners who are clueless snakes who just want to make money.
I must say I'm not. I don't have enough hopes for democratic processes to actually produce knowledge, let alone specialized, let alone technical knowledge. I mean, and I'm not one that would necessarily go out and simply sing the song of monarchy or of technocracy, although you're the one that first confessed here that you're the druggist. Um, but I think that what I can say after having spent an ungodly amount of time in the US, first during the Bush years and now over the last 10 years, looking at Trump from the safe distance, or what I thought was the safe distance of Europe, um, is that my concern is probably less about participation. I don't think participation would be the solution to the kind of deficit of political courage that I feel is sort of at the core of the European illness or the European shortcomings. Let me just shift a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. So what happened directly after JD Vance did his number was that well, Macron, as the Macronist, of course, you should take pride in this, convened in Paris what, for all extents and purposes, might be the beginning of a new defense alliance outside NATO. Of course, Rutte was there, so NATO was implicated in the affair, at least to some degree. But there were two important blocs that were not there. Obviously, the Americans were not there. But almost just as importantly is that the mullahs of Urbanistan were not there either. I mean, Poland was there, but we know that Poland would not have been there if it were ruled by the PIS. And the rest of the friends of that group, Fico and Babiš, etc., were not there. One more element that I thought was absolutely remarkable about this is that the clarion call for the constitution of this alliance did not come from Europe. It came from the great commander of all Western military resistance, the great Zelensky himself. Zelensky stood there, said that Europe needs an army, and all of a sudden Macron was, ready to march. So what do we know that came out of there so far, if anything?
So, so yeah, the JD Vance thing I think was, again, this is falling back on what we said earlier, where we've been saying this for a year now. We've been saying, well, like 10 years now, sorry, even. This has been an old thing since the Macron's Sorbonne speech in September 2017, I think, the first one or the second one. And the reality is that this is falling into this old Macronist, or like this was an old academic debate before Macron, but Macron brought it to the table in the council of a two-tier Europe. And at this stage, we have to just do this. I mean, like, we can't keep screwing around with fucking Orban just talking shit. I mean, this guy and his circus of idiots basically spent all day yesterday posting about needing a European Doge using their stupid think tank in Brussels. I mean, it's all this nonsense where you've got these people who keep reducing everything and limiting everything and blah blah blah. And to be quite honest, the fact that we had all of the big hitters at this meeting on Monday. So you had Rutte, Tusk, you had Starmer, you had Pedro Sanchez, Schulz, Macron, you had Meloni, the European leaders, the institutional leaders, sorry, and the Danish, and it's you. I think even the Swedish would, to be honest. But you have to just do things, and admittedly, there is a wider meeting taking place today, I think, with more actors. So I think they're involving now the Romanians, the Finnish, I think, and one or two other member states. But at this stage, it's gotten to the point where you just have to accept that people, pardon me, people like Fico, people like Orban, people like Babiš aren't friends of the European project. They're
No, I mean,
here to
I
just make money.
actually, I would argue that these are actually fifth columns,
Oh no, they are a
not
fifth
a
column,
project.
100%.
And I think that what is really quite remarkable about it, when they actually talk about Dodge and they do talk about the sort of the Muskian, Mileyan, as an Argentinian, I feel I need to say that Milei's purge of the state is very much consistent with the type of politics that they have exercised for years, right? I mean, it is
Yeah.
this sort of state capture, proto-totalitarian, Putinist thing that now they actually found a sort of an ally, a new ally, I would even say, in the US, because this Trump is not the same Trump as the previous one. And one of the things that sort of I think it is to some degree an expression of idiocy, but I also think that there is something much more malicious and much more dangerous. Is that I don't think that these forces are actually interesting with the dismemberment of Europe anymore. I think that what these people are more interested in is in the capture of Europe. And I do fear that, and I see Meloni, I must say, I see Meloni as a very ambiguous character that paints herself European, but I think that under the blue and yellow, there is really just deep, deep black, both in the shirts and in the ideas. And I would sort of really argue that there is now a set of people, which I like to call the new axis, that are within shooting range of actually capturing large parts of the European machine. So I think that what is really interesting about the Paris meeting is that on the one hand, it sort of offers a kind of a possibility for recuperating parts and pieces
Yeah, of course. And
of
this
the
is
of
something
the
that,
so of the security architecture and of the institutional architecture of Europe and of the European project. But at the very same time, I find that itself to be essentially the declaration of death, right? The declaration of death of the European project in its extended form with its extended neighborhoods, the NATO project as a defense alliance. I don't want to here sound like we are here facing apocalypse. I think that there is rather sort of a posthumous and very late realization that this has been dead for years now. And that, as a matter of fact, the problem is that when we reach out for the tools that we need to defend European territory from the Russians, I mean, be it the Polish border or the Baltics, if you prefer, or the integrity of Ukraine as an extended sort of a strategic interest, or the European market, or the European digital public sphere, which is now awash with like MAGA type influencers vomiting out like anti Semitic and Islamophobic and whatnot messages. The tools that we reach for, the European Union, the consensus principle, NATO, are just not fit for purpose.
no, and this is something that we need to figure out because, okay, like a lot of people, and myself included, think that we should remove countries like Hungary from the EU because they're clearly actively undermining the security of everybody. And the issue that we have is that a lot of people I mean, there's rightly some concerns about people, missing out on EU citizenship, like, Hungarians who did nothing wrong being punished for this. But I mean, we're getting to the point where a lot of these actors will need to be removed in some way, shape, or form. And that's a complicated issue because there's no legal precedence for that in the treaties, if I'm not wrong.
You're
So
not
this,
wrong. You're not wrong. There is no precedent and there is no mechanism for extraction. There
yeah,
is
and
Article 5, which is, if I remember right, it's 5, which is essentially just retiring voting rights. But even in the most outrageous sort of, moments of Polish and Hungarian contemporary history, with Timmermans leading the church, they still did not manage to do that.
Yeah. And this is one of these things that it's very complicated to do. But I mean, you're not wrong that there is a new axis of illiberalism coming out and coming forward. I mean, you see people in Brussels, especially, who, with one hand, pretend to be friendly towards, oh, I mean, let's be honest, migrants, women, Jews, Muslims, everybody. And then on the other hand, they're voting for people like Orban, they're going to work for them, they are sharing very problematic views from these people and praising them in several ways. And we have a serious issue because, like you said earlier, we're looking at a potential dismemberment of Ukraine. We're looking at an end to the European project if we don't do this right. But I don't think that changing how things work is necessarily problematic or the end of the European project. Yeah, I think it's more of an understanding that we did everything we could with what we had. We just need to actually improve it. Like, we need to take things, we need to move things on. I mean, I remember there was a really interesting project a few years ago that I interviewed the founder for, who is now no longer, I mean, reachable, sadly, because she left the public sphere. Basically, there was this whole proposal about basically taking the European Union and creating it into a sort of European Republic where there was more voting power at the European level through the European Parliament and the European Senate, combining the roles of the Commission and the Council presidencies, making sure that there was at least one person who was accountable to not only European voters, but who was reachable by international leaders and who could coordinate with Macron, Scholz, or soon to be Merz, Meloni, everybody, because we have reached the end of this form of Europe, I think. And this is something that I think is very underrated, and people forget that we can't just keep doing, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting things to change. And while we can wait for the next crisis to come along to give us a big kick in the ass to actually do something, that's not how you govern effectively.
I have to tell you, I mean, I do see this as a make and break crisis, which will not only disassemble political projects, which to me are very dear. I mean, I am a completely committed Europeanist, as are you. But I think that, one of my big fears living in a place like Berlin, being a Jew, despite the fact that I realize that in view of people that would watch this, there is the icon of the Mary of the Madia from Puglia. I don't want to get to the point in which we have actually a rehabilitation of the European project that requires another sort of large number of monuments to the people that we have lost, exiled, and made disappear during the latest European crisis. I think that for me would be ideal that we get to that reform of Europe, that restructuring, which I absolutely agree, needs to flush out problematic actors. I mean, and I think that those are visibly, to me, nations where basically the instability and the exposure to reincidence into bad Orban-style politics are viable. I mean, when people talk about Ukraine becoming part of the EU, or Turkey becoming part of the EU, which is actually not talked a lot, or Albania becoming part of the EU, I don't see it at all. I'm sorry to say, I don't see it at all, because one of the things I recognize is that although engagement, as Verheugen used to say here, is important, I think that the moment that I imagine, a sort of a Yanukovych kind of person seating some of his people inside the European Commission, I shudder. So I think that it is absolutely the case that we need a rearticulation of the European project. But I think at the same time, there really has to be a sort of almost an oath of loyalty to the values on which this Europe has been built, even we have often betrayed them, those things become important, because I think that coming out of the Vance speech and what we've seen afterwards from Trump and all of his lackeys across the globe, I think that it is really an attack on our values above everything else.
Yeah.
Right? Above everything else. I mean, the reason why there is a commitment to undermining our economy and there is a commitment to undermining our territorial integrity and so on and so forth is because there is a serious enmity with our values. And I think that this goes to show that perhaps they understand us much better than we often understand ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that this is very much a reality, or maybe they understand hard power better than we do. Because I think combining a lack of confidence, a lack of understanding of the situation around us, a lack of élan, I would say, is very much a... It's one of these things that makes it harder for us to actually react, on top of the fifth column that's sapping our strength and our everything. And it makes it easier for countries that are more used to employing hard power and soft power in really geopolitical and aggressively geopolitical ways, I would say. You know, it's one of these things where we're just not doing what we need to be doing, and there is a certain agility you have when you're just a single member state of a state.
Certainly.
When you're just a state, you have a lot more power and a lot more speed. And you can do a lot more, and you can have a lot more certainty. I mean, who remembers the Fiona Scott Morton fiasco when we almost had an American leading European trade policy because she was friends with Vestager and Ursula von der Leyen?
Yeah.
It's like absolute nonsense.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And we
Okay,
still do
look,
this.
we've been on 40 minutes.
Yes.
I have children to take care of, milk to buy, as you now know. But it's been great. I think we should try this again next week to see if we are more depressed or less depressed.
Nah, I'm never depressed. You have to have hope if you're working in European affairs. If you
Yeah,
don't have
you
hope,
do.
then there's no reason to be here, huh?
You do. I just try not to be too much of a realist. This is my aim. All right, man.
You can be an optimistic realist. Come on, man.
Yeah, that's only Fridays for me. But yes. All right. So great talking to you, and I hope
Likewise.
that our audience has loved this and will listen to us again as soon as we manage to coordinate the next one.
I'll see you again in 8 months.
Talk to you soon. Ish.
Ish.